Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn. In today's episode, we're talking about Jerry Jeudy. Recent trade between the Cleveland Browns and the Denver Broncos has led to the Browns acquiring Jerry Jeudy. And we're going to look at him in terms of his pre-draft profile, post-draft profile, to see if this was a good trade for the Browns, who won, all those different kinds of things. So first off, let's start with his pre-draft profile, because a lot of times you can figure out what an NFL player is going to be based on how they did in college. It can inform a lot of different things about them at the NFL level. And when you look at Jerry Jeudy in terms of offensive market share, pause the video real quick if you're new to the channel. Good numbers here, 82 percentile in terms of his receiving market share, 72 percentile in terms of total offensive market share, and then 68 percentile in terms of touchdown market share. Based on his production, did he have elite production? No. He's very close to the starter averages at the position. So he kind of tested like a starting to fringe Pro Bowler based on his production traits coming out of college. Then when you look at his efficiency scores, efficiency dealing with like touchdowns per touch and yards per reception, he was elite in terms of these numbers, guys. 90 percentile in terms of those two particular traits, in terms of his, yards per reception and touchdowns per touch. So he was extremely efficient. Wasn't the most productive, but he was efficient at a rate that, hey, if they gave him the football more, he might have done a lot more with it from that kind of perspective. So in terms of that, that's pretty decent. Now, in terms of wide receiver athleticism, this is where he kind of ran into some issues. He had a 36 percentile explosion score, 62 percentile in terms of speed, and then 11.48 percentile in terms of his estimated flexibility score. It's estimated because he didn't do the three cone. I basically based on the short shuttle and then the average three cone for players with his short shuttle. So he could have been better, could have been worse, but he didn't do that testing, so it's kind of hard to see. But this is the profile for him. Now, as you can clearly see, he does kind of hit the starter thresholds and Pro Bowl thresholds from an athleticism standpoint, but this is not exactly an elite level athlete. He's not the most explosive guy. He's not the most flexible guy, but he does have good speed for his size, above average speed. Now, when you look at his adjusted production scores, this is where Jeudy did really well, and this is also why I think the Browns are even considering acquiring him, because he did have great adjusted production. So 98 percentile in terms of his age, 95 percentile in terms of his MSA rating, and then 97 percentile in terms of his pass rating for these particular metrics. So his production for his age, his level of competition, and of course the team that he played on was very, very high level for him. So these definitely put him within the starter averages, all-pro averages, and Pro Bowl averages at the position. Now, when you get to his actual NFL production, this is where things are a little like, to a certain extent. A score, the macro P score. So the rest of these numbers you can kind of get from Pro Football Reference. Targets, receptions, yards, all of these scores are percentile scores. So you can look up these numbers on Pro Football Reference. But the things that I created were things such as macro P. Macro P is a score that includes targets, total receptions, yards, yards before contact, broken tackles, and other macro-based stats. So these are the stats that you look at. If you say a wide receiver had 1,000 yards, 1,000 yards is 1,000 yards. There's nothing else added to it. There's no context given to it. It's just the aggregate data, if you will. It's an aggregation of the macro production. Now, the EFF is the efficiency score. That looks at things like yards before contact per reception, yak per reception, number of receptions per broken tackle. So if a wide receiver catches the ball 6 times and then gets a broken tackle, then versus a guy who gets it 3 times and gets a broken tackle, you typically want the wide receiver that breaks tackles more often per reception. So that's essentially what that kind of looks at. And of course, you have the drop percentage. The quarterback rating, or RAT, is what the quarterback rating typically is when you target him in the passing game. And then, of course, you have the first down percentage. And then Rec Star is the macro production plus the efficiency score, giving you kind of a holistic look at their production. Giving them credit for starts and production, and also giving them credit for the efficiency that they put up. And based on these numbers, Jeudy's career has been a little, in terms of stuff. A starter, of course, 92 percentile in terms of his rec star in 2022, and then 89 percentile in terms of 2023. But his 2022 season was decent. I would legitimately say that was a breakout season for him based on his macro P and his efficiency data. So he did very well that year at age 23 also. So he's still a young prospect. He's going to be 25 years next year, 25 years old next year, or this year, I should say. And looking at the comparables, so these are all the wide receivers that typically perform like this. So isolating for the macro production and the efficiency production for 2022 and 2023, these are all the wide receivers that typically perform like Jerry Jeudy. There's some older wide receivers in here, so you can kind of discount a couple of these guys like John Brown, for example. But for the most part, this is a pretty decent group of wide receivers to be in, guys. Guys like Deebo Samuel, Alshon Jeffrey, Jaden Reed, Chris Godwin even, Tyler Lockett. I mean, he produced pretty well. It's just the offense he was in at Denver was not that great. So again, you might not like Jerry Jeudy for whatever reason. Again, he's not an elite wide receiver prospect by any stretch of the imagination. But when you look at his production and his efficiency scores, he's not doing too bad, in terms of his data from that perspective. Now, in terms of the outlook for Jerry Jeudy, let's get some basic math, okay? Because I like to do this for trade evaluations because it's just basic math. Jerry Jeudy has averaged an approximate value score of 6 per season from 2020 to 2023. So every year he played, he typically gave you about 6 approximate value points, if you will. And 6 is a pretty darn good number. I mean, that's typically most first round picks give you about a 6, which he was a first round pick in terms of their production. So he's been a starter, and that's an above average trait in the NFL. Now, when you look at it compared to the average AV of the picks they traded, so the Browns traded pick 156, where the average AV, so if you randomly took a player at pick 156 from, from 1993 until now, the average AV of that pick is 1.18. So if you just randomly pick the player there, you're most likely going to get 1.18 in terms of approximate value. And then if you went to pick 206 and randomly pick the player there, you're most likely going to get a prospect with a 1.16 approximate value score. So if you look at it, they get a wide receiver who gives you 6 approximate value score overall, and they gave up about 2 and some change extra. So they profited 3.66 worth of approximate value from the trade. That's equivalent to like a second round pick, if you will, from a draft perspective. Okay, so this is pretty good, guys. Whether you love Jeudy or hate him, this was a decent trade by the Browns. Jeudy isn't an all-star wide receiver, but he doesn't have to be for this trade to make sense for the Browns. All he has to do is be a starting wide receiver. And so far in his career, he's been efficient. He's been productive. Obviously not elite productive, but I think a lot of that comes down to the offense he was playing on the Denver Broncos. And I think in general, they also gained a wide receiver who would turn 25 years old, which means the Browns will get him in his prime years. So again, this isn't like a 29-year-old over-the-hill wide receiver. Guys, this guy still has some more years to him. So this is a pretty I mean, this is an elite trade, if you will. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to compare it to every single trade. That's going to take a long time to evaluate. But in general, the Browns won this trade. And I know there was some rumors and talks about them trying to give up like a first rounder or a second rounder or something like that in terms to get Jeudy, and it didn't work out. But this is good. This is a good selection. The only way that this pick doesn't work out is if Jeudy doesn't start. If he ends up on the bench and doesn't contribute anything at all as a player, I mean, it's stupid easy to get two AV as a backup wide receiver. So if he ends up being a starter, you're cooking with gas at that point, guys. So this was a very good, pretty good, pretty darn good trade, I would say, in terms of winners and losers. So, well, all that stuff out of the way. Thank you guys so much for watching. Of course, my name is Jim Coburn. You can follow my other work at Geometrics on X, formerly known as Twitter. Also, check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/jcoburn. Like, comment, and subscribe, people. Was the Jerry Jeudy trade good? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Uh, what are your thoughts on it overall? And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.